Okay, so hello everybody. This is Wesley here, and during this time of quarantine, I wanted to do something with my YouTube channel to make something for people to enjoy. But between balancing schoolwork, an internship, and co-op applications, I don't really have time to put into extra video editing. So what I decided to do is to try my hand at making a podcast series with some of the conversations I have with my friends. The concept is actually quite simple. It's just my friends and I chat as we always do about things like school, entertainment, politics, and the Christian faith that we share. And then we share this conversation with other people. So if you're listening to this, welcome to the first of hopefully many more podcasts to come. I really don't know what to call this series. Maybe just a chat or something like that. But today, to start our first ever podcast off, I have my good friend Sean with me. Sean, we are now live. Hello, Sean.
Hi,
How are you doing today?
I am fine.
Cool. Been up to much since the last time we talked?
No.
All right then. Anything on your mind today to talk about at all?
Nope. I
All
was
right.
just here to see where it goes.
All right.
So what is on your mind?
you
And
know,
what have
I,
you been up to?
I actually have a lot of stuff on my mind. I don't. I can't really say I've been up to much aside just from like school, doing some projects and work. But I've had a very interesting conversation online today with some of my good friends, and it's very fresh. It's very recent. This happened like 10 minutes ago, before we
Wow.
started this. Yeah, like for half an hour, 40 something minutes, and we just ended it like 10 minutes ago. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on this matter. Basically, the topic is dating a non-Christian as a Christian. Loaded question, I know.
No. There's my answer.
No. Yeah. Well, I would say so as well. What is your reasoning for that?
All right. I understand that there are a lot of people that do this, and then okay, how should I approach this?
Yeah.
Because
Take your time
the
with it.
reasoning is simply put, God is supposed to be the most important relationship in your life, and your romantic dating, sexual relationship, marriage thing. Also, the sex comes after the marriage. Just pointing that out too. But uh,
Yeah.
all of that is supposed to go with God. And, God is supposed to be involved in that, and it is supposed to be a relationship where two people together are serving God. Not necessarily going together and serving together in church, but the whole thing is supposed to be serving God. And if one of them is not a Christian, it just isn't gonna work.
Hmm. I like how you mentioned that the relationship is like it should be just first and foremost is of God and for God.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the issue with the conversation I had with my friends came up um, when we're talking about this person who is a Christian in the
Mhm.
relationship. They're the friend,
Mhm.
and it's like, okay, well, they don't want to listen to our reasoning of like why Christians should not date non-Christians and all that stuff because they themselves are not very in tune with like what the Bible says, what God says about relations and all that stuff. For example,
Yeah.
they'll be like, "Oh, the Bible says very strongly premarital sex is a bad thing, so we'll not do it." But dating a non-Christian, like that's a small to them it's a smaller topic and something that's kind of like what is the reasoning behind that? Because they don't really have that relationship with God in the first place. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, the basis for our answer is not really a basis for them at all. Do you have
Mhm.
anything that you could say to that, or like just if you had a friend who is like that, and for example, they're asking you to be like the groomsman at their wedding, what would your response be?
For the groomsmen, I don't really know because I would need to think more about that,
Mm,
and it would also depend on the situation.
yeah.
But overall, when it comes to dating a non-Christian, it's like it might not be as uh, quoted as much like scripturally, but like the principle is definitely evident in the Bible that we are to be relationally with God first.
Right.
And there are like situations where people are Christians are in relation with non-Christians, like married to them. But like for example, where is it? Somewhere in the New Testament,
Hmm.
Paul talks about this issue where there was like two non-Christian people who were non-Christian. One of them converts,
Yeah.
but they're also called to stay with them.
Yeah.
But that is also very different from intentionally starting and staying in a relationship with a non-Christian.
Yeah. Yeah. That verse was actually brought up, I think, near the beginning of our conversation online.
Hmm.
The biggest issue that the person who brought up this topic was asking for was just, you know, they also don't think that it's right to date and then marry a non-Christian. But the person in question is their best friend, and their best friend has asked them to be the groomsman slash bridesmaid of their wedding. So they are
Hmm.
at a dilemma now. Do they do it or do they not do it? Because on one hand they're thinking like, as a friend they need to support, as the best friend they have like, they're in a position that's like, you know they feel obligated to be there for them,
Hmm.
especially in this kind of like crucial moment in life, big moment. But at the same time they don't support this decision of marrying at all because they're a non-Christian. So
Mm.
the conversation kind of spiraled from there, and it became like a, how do we talk to someone who refuses to listen to these kinds of things? Because the next issue was, well, they're not willing to listen, and even if you tried to tell them, they'd be just like, oh cool, thank you for sharing your opinion, I'm gonna stick to mine, kind of thing. So yeah, that's just the thing that's been swimming in my mind for the past half hour.
Mm.
Yeah, but isn't it interesting just how like so many people nowadays say, "Oh yeah, I believe in God. I have a relationship with God," but really they don't. And I know that might sound harsh, but it's like I feel like that's actually the case.
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah, I understand. Don't worry, I
yeah.
see it too that way. It's like you might go to church, and that's like the best that you'll do. And it's like, I don't think that like I don't think that's good enough. Like it's like, okay, you said the prayer once, and then you occasionally show up at church. If
Hmm.
that's like as best as as it goes, that's like I'm not sure if there's like really a relationship there.
Yeah.
It's like technically, well, it's like technically you're a Christian, maybe. Well, if you haven't renounced you, and then, but like in actuality, there's like nothing there,
Hmm.
which is also like a factor in this because it's like, let me see. Suppose someone is one of those Christians. They've been called someone I know calls them nominal Christians. We'll just use that name for the sake of it.
Nominal
Clarification.
Christians?
Yeah. Well, actually, no. Maybe we shouldn't use the name. I don't really know what it means.
Yeah, I don't know what that means either.
Yeah, it's like, and then like it might be slightly different, but anyways, the person who is like very lukewarm Christian. I
Okay,
think
okay.
that's a good way to
I
put
like
it.
that term because it is
Yeah,
biblical. The
it is
Bible
also
mentions it.
yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and
We
it's
use that in the
like
conversation as well.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Because honestly, for them, I can see why they don't think it's that big of a deal because well, their faith frankly isn't that big of a deal to them. So
It like
like,
centers around practicality, their decisions, and like
yeah.
they see the world around them and it's just like, oh yeah, that looks good. That's very practical. It's helpful. I'll do it. Right. It
Hmm.
doesn't impede on my faith in any way because my faith is a faith of just my belief, my personal belief. Like why should that have anything to do with like the rest of my actions, my decisions, and stuff like that? Yeah, that's what
Yeah.
I think that's how. I don't know if anyone listening to this doesn't agree with that, please correct me.
Mm.
Yeah, but so Sean, something that I want to ask you about because you brought it up
Hmm.
is, having this relationship with God, um, and we say that like we really know what that means, but what does it mean and look like actually to have a relationship with God if so many people nowadays are like not actually having a relationship? Then what does having a real relationship with God look like to you? What would that look like?
Are you asking what my personal relationship with God looks like, or what I think a relationship with God looks like.
But I think the latter.
Okay.
And then yeah, if you think that your personal relationship with God reflects that, you can use examples, I guess. But I
Yeah.
know that's like kind of a personal thing. If you don't want to share, that's also
Oh,
fine,
that's
and
fine.
that's perfect. So yeah,
Okay, so I think it helps to begin with like, okay, what like define okay, well what is a relationship? And then
okay,
what is a relationship with God?
okay,
So we sort of have an idea of what a relationship is
yeah,
between two people. And then a relationship with God is like hmm. We've talked about this before, like the a relationship, like a romantic relationship, like a marriage relationship, and versus like a relationship with God, and just try to like using them as an analogy, and then but then at a point, the analogy doesn't work.
mm-hmm.
So I'm just trying to think. Okay, so relationship is obviously well, relationship with God between person and God,
Yeah,
and this is originally what the human race was designed to be
mm-hmm.
in like in the Garden of Eden when the world, the universe, and everything was being created.
Yeah,
God created people to be in relationship with Him. Sin entered the world. Then like there was this barrier of sin between man and God. Then Jesus came and died for our sins, and those who confess that He is Lord and believe in Him and accept this gift of His sacrifice on the cross can have a restored relationship with God that allows them and God to have a restored relationship again. And God desires this relationship. And in Jesus describes this as a very intimate relationship by the term that he uses,
yeah,
like one of like a very personal relationship between like a father and a son.
yeah,
That type of close relationship. So that is roughly what it's supposed to look like. To go deeper and to explain the dynamics of the relationship, we can look to biblical characters, people like King David, Jesus, Paul, Moses, to see what this relationship looks like under both the New and the Old Covenant.
yeah,
And this relationship is marked by intimacy, like praying with God a lot, all the
mm-hmm.
time, essentially. Not necessarily like just praying as in like constantly asking God for things, but also just to like talk with God, to get God's opinion about like what they should do. Like many Christians who wake up in the morning and read the Bible first thing, or pray in the morning, or worship, beginning with some aspect that centralizes God as like the most important component of their life.
Uh-huh.
Of course, not every Christian needs to begin their relationship with their day with God every single day, but many do because of the practical way of just getting God involved and reminding themselves that ultimately this day as a part of their life is for God, and so they're going to consult with Him and remind themselves that this is all of this, everything that they do, is for God,
Mm-hmm.
and not necessarily in the like working for a boss type thing, but just sort of like everything that they do should have this touch of God, so to speak, of like their interactions as a Christian should reflect and glorify God through the choices and the decisions that they make every day.
Mm-hmm.
And in order for that to happen, part of that also goes back to praying a lot and praying about God about everything. Essentially everything, getting God's input on things.
Mm-hmm.
To use the analogy of marriage, you wake up, well, most couples most married couples are asleep in the same bed, and then they wake up and then their partner is the first thing that they see.
Yeah,
And that like first person they talk to, and then they get their input on many important decisions. They connect constantly throughout the day. So to use that analogy of like God is heavily involved in the Christian's life
mm-hmm.
in terms
Interesting.
of
Heavily
yeah,
involved. Okay.
yeah. And to go back to what we were talking about earlier and the lukewarm Christian, lukewarm Christian might technically be a Christian because of saying the sinner's prayer and accepting Jesus one time, maybe at like uh, a camp a while ago or like a church experience. But the lukewarm Christian suffers from God just not being a significant component in their life. Whereas for the, I don't want to say true Christian because like that just sounds off. I don't like how that sounds, but like it is
Yeah.
sort of true, but
Okay.
I don't like how it sounds.
Okay, I get what you're saying though. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. For like the Christian as God would like them to be, they're connected to God and they're also involved with this church, with fellowship with other believers as well.
Okay.
There's both the intimate personal aspect of like one-on-one, but
Mm-hmm.
also like the relationship between God, them, and other believers.
Mm-hmm.
Such, for example, their spouse, who should be a Christian,
Mm-hmm.
just to point that out again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Christian, like the church, this small group. The small group has as a subset of the broader global church,
Yeah.
and even and also a regular like tradition. Well, the idea of a church, as we would conceive it, like a body of believers that meet together regularly and get taught by a pastor, that sort of thing. So the individual, their close small group, and then the broader church that they attend to receive teaching.
Hmm.
Serving is also involved in that in some aspect. Not necessarily like the needing to serve everywhere through the church, but like serving in some making use of the talents that God has given them for in life and also to serve others.
Mm-hmm.
That's not necessary. I don't want to give a strict connotation that has to be like, oh, it has to be at church and like all of that, but like there's, which is a good thing, but serving and using your talents in some way, that is a component, that is one component of the Christian life too.
Yeah.
And yeah, so essentially a relationship with God is relationship with God, like one-on-one, one-to-one relationship,
Yeah.
but then also like relationship with God through other people. Like for example, relationship with spouse and God together in this sort of triangle like configuration, for lack of a better term, even though it,
Yes, the triangle.
yeah, you know, the very cliche triangle.
Oh yeah,
And
it's
then
used everywhere.
yeah,
It's good though. Like it's cliche, but
yeah,
it's
yeah,
good.
it suits our purposes.
Yeah, it's a
Geometry,
great imagery. Yeah.
yeah, geometry is helpful. One thing about the triangle that is, it's not like, it's not in, what is that triangle? Um, what is the triangle that is equal on all sides?
Equilateral.
Yeah, it's not an equilateral triangle because the relationship between God and one partner and God and the other partner is not as the same. Is not the same as like the relationship between one Christian and the other.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more like an isosceles triangle, I guess. This is getting unnecessarily. This might get, well, not unnecessarily,
Do we
but
need
you know,
do we need to put like a graphic of a triangle to explain what you're saying?
yes, yeah. Just like edit the video somewhat. Just put like a triangle, like just Google
Here's an
images
equilateral.
triangle,
Here's
not
an
this.
isosceles.
Yeah, yeah, it's like that
If
because
you
like
don't
the
know what an isosceles triangle is, well, here you go. No, I
yeah,
don't think we'll do that. It's just funny.
yeah, yeah. Essentially, relationship with God is relationship between individual and God, and also relationship between individual, God's community, and God together. So the main thing is that God is heavily involved in their life.
Okay.
That is a very roundabout way with many tangents, but I think
No.
that you guys get the general idea of what I'm going for.
So that's kind of your summary of like
Yes,
what a relationship with God is, right? It's just like having God in your life, involved in your life.
yes, and obeying Him. That is important too. I'm not sure if I mentioned that, but
I don't know if you did, but yeah, to me that actually is the most important part. Because we can say we have a relationship with God and we can do quote unquote good things, right? But at the end of the day, if you don't directly obey what he says, I don't think that's quite correct.
yeah,
Um, earlier you mentioned how the Bible describes our relationship with God as in a child to a father. And,
Yeah.
if you look at the Bible and you study what the Bible says about family, which actually is just derived from our relationship as a people
Mm-hmm.
with Christ, right? The relationship is one of obedience, it's one of reverence. That type of respect.
Mm-hmm.
Recently, as a part of just my general Bible study groups and studying through the book of Romans,
Mm-hmm.
my newest conclusion. I don't know if I could consider it new, but essentially my bigger takeaway so far in review, in learning, whatever, is that faith is not necessarily this description of I believe in Jesus Christ. That's not real faith.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people think it is faith, but that's what I would call is as like lukewarm, because it doesn't really mean anything. It's just literally that. It's just a personal belief. So
Mm-hmm.
I would tell people, this is what I think faith is. Faith is the decision to trust in God, who sent his son Jesus Christ to die for us, that God will give us the power to obey.
Mm-hmm.
And if that is what faith is, then that means on a daily basis we look to God, we believe in him, that he exists, that he will give us grace to obey, grace being the power to obey.
Mm-hmm.
And that as a Christian, our sole purpose in life is to obey him. And what that looks like is we read the Bible, and what the Bible says, we obey it. And I think some people have issue with that because they'll be like, oh, the Bible is old. Like, we live in the 21st century. The Bible was written in, like, the first, second century, completed then. There are a lot of books that were a part of the Bible at one point in time, different people. And then there's just people who are like, the Bible might not even be trustworthy, you know. But I think that as a part of my faith and as a part of that obedience, experiencing God and having God confirm the validity of Scripture is also very much a part of it. I personally am at a place where I don't necessarily have the empirical answers as to why the Bible is, a valid piece of writing to like base the entire life on and stuff like that. But I think I want to get there. Um, Anyways, back on topic.
Yes. Oh, one thing I noticed, like
Oh
when
yeah,
you mentioned that when we were talking about obedience,
yeah, go for it.
is that one flaw of like using between like the marriage analogy, and the relationship with God
Yeah.
is that marriage is not necessarily about like authority and submission and obedience. It's of course, and there's like debate on this about like the role of men and women and all of that,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not primarily one of like obedience of like obedience as if like a parent child relationship.
Mm.
So there's like one flaw of like using of like that analogy, which is somewhat the relationship I use more as an analogy for this,
Mm-hmm.
because like it doesn't quite capture like the importance of obedience as like using another relationship like the parent child relationship would, because children just obey their parents because like that's just what they do, you know.
That's interesting that you bring that up because I actually believe otherwise.
Oh.
Yeah. Well, this is you mentioned this already. How some people there's debate. Some people believe the thing about that role of men and women in a relationship, be it romantic or just as a family and stuff like that. Not long ago, I learned about the topic of federal headship, which
Oh
does talk
yes.
about how in terms of the spiritual aspect of a family, God did designate the man to be the head of the house and to be the leader in that sense. I do agree with you in saying that no, it's not the same type of obedience as you would see with like a child and their parents. That it's
Yeah.
totally different because that one is, an authoritative relationship. I guess you could say an authoritative type of obedience. While yes, you could argue that the man and woman's relationship is authoritative because when you have someone being a leader, they are in authority, right?
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it does require mutual respect. The Bible says that, if the man doesn't treat the woman right, according to the biblical concepts, he loses that authority. And that he's no longer bound by that because that's something God ordained, right? And if you don't follow what God has ordained, then you're not actually doing it properly. So you lose that authority kind of thing. Anyways, yeah, no, I just find it interesting you brought that up because
Yeah.
to me, there is still certain authority and certain levels of obedience. It's just not the same type of obedience that people usually think about. So I agree with you in that we probably shouldn't look to it as an example when we're talking about like a relationship with Christ because it's a little different. God
Yes, it
doesn't
is.
God doesn't yield to us the same way that a man would be yielding to a woman in respect. But on the other hand, we could look at God as like our federal head because he is. If you stack everything up into like one gigantic pyramid hierarchy, yeah, God sits at the very top. There's nothing around that.
Yeah.
We just obey him, right? I find it weird that in the modern day church, with like postmodernism floating around and being a thing, that like people start to just like I guess the word is subjectivize. I actually don't know what the word is, but like they make everything subjective. It's like leave me alone. I have my own set of thinking. You have your own set of thinking. There is no relative. There is no objective truth. Everything is relative. Everything is subjective, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something we absolutely need to avoid because there's that just means there's nothing to ground anything on. If that's the case. Anyways,
Yeah.
that was actually a tangent.
No, yeah, it's an important tangent.
Yeah. What were we talking about originally? Relationship with God?
Yes.
Yeah, no. This is a repeat, but I think one of the key aspects of a relationship with God is obedience. Is following, is understanding what he calls us to do and then following it. I think
Yeah.
that's what obedience is.
Yes.
In talking about parent-child relations, I find it very interesting because I'm pretty sure many people can relate to this. How, as a child, you were told what you should do, what you shouldn't do, without necessarily an understanding of like why or what the point is. But then one day, maybe one day, when you grow up and you realize it, it becomes clear, and then you have the knowledge to go behind your actions to back it up. But when you were a child, you knew none of that. You either you just had the choice: obey or don't obey, right? And if you obeyed, then maybe it becomes a habit, maybe it becomes second nature for you, or maybe it becomes easier for you to do the thing that you were told to do, right? And that would be good. Or you could rebel, don't obey, suffer the consequences later on, and then have a harder time, maybe have a harder time obeying or doing that thing in the future. And I think that if you look at it like that, it's so much better to just obey even when you don't have the understanding, because the Bible promises us in the same way that like as a child we grow up, one day we'll understand. The Bible promises us that, right now we have half understanding, but one day we will be given full understanding of everything, and all will be made clear. I remember I had a point I wanted to get through, going back to the topic of just like dating relationships as a Christian. Oh yeah, we've already mentioned federal headship. I think that without when one of your partners, whether you are a guy or a girl, and your partner is a non-Christian, I question how you can live a proper life as a Christian like that, because now you have to deal with the fact that one of you is the spiritual head, one of you is the spiritual follower and the supporter. And in a complementarianistic relationship like that kind of system doesn't really work if one person doesn't fulfill their role. Sure, if the female is the Christian and the male is the non-Christian, it becomes all the more harder because God ordained the man to be the head, and yet the female is the one here doing all of that. And I find it interesting how the Bible says, if they want to marry, it's fine, but it's not a good idea just because you're missing out on so much of that life, that good life that God designed for us to live. You know, the system of federal headship was meant to enhance life, was meant to make life great and all the more better and enjoyable. And without that, you don't, you're missing out on a part of the life that God has actually just mandated is this is the best. That's how I feel. I don't necessarily know if that's true or not, but that's just how I personally feel about it. And the entire thing was just like, First Corinthians says, how could a husband or a wife know that their unbelieving partner will come to faith one day? Like, that's not something they should hope on. That's not a valid reason to marry a non-Christian. That's pretty much just an excuse in my mind.
Yeah.
It's like there's so much more beyond what we've talked about outside of just the relational aspects. That entire just like, you're not even obeying God, first of all, when you marry a non-Christian. How are you possibly going to live a proper Christian life if you've already failed with one thing here, kind of thing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
I remember I had something else to say, but I don't remember.
Yeah. I had something too, and then like I'm just sort of like
lost it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Take a moment, maybe, just to let
yes.
everything we said, like, kind of just sit, and then just try and think about what we were trying to say.
Also, I'm going to get a drink of water in the meantime because my mouth is bothering me.
Yeah. No worries.
It's probably because of just sort of like, you eat something and then like it's good, but it's just sort of like it's like,
oh,
whatever. You know what everybody has experienced.
I think I know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyways,
yeah,
I shall return
go get a water
momentarily.
Yeah. What was I trying to? I know I had something else I wanted to say. I hate this. I hate moments like these. I just forget what I'm going to say after I've said everything else I've wanted to say, and it just bothers me. Also, yes, if you guys are choosing to listen to this with on YouTube with the video itself open, I am playing Mario Kart while we're talking. I'm not focused on it though. I think I'm doing pretty badly. What was I trying to say earlier? I had something I wanted to say. No. Oh. Great. I actually forgot what I was going to say. We talked about relations. We talked about... I'm pretty sure it was about the topic of like being in a relationship with God. What it means to be a Christian. Oh, I remember what I'm going to say. Okay, now I just have to hang on to this thought. So yeah, I'm not going to be editing any of this out. What we say is what we say. Everything's going to be in here, including all the awkward pauses like this, and the awkward spaces where we don't talk. So, Sean, you better get back fast because it's going to be super, super awkward if we just keep this gap here. I guess that's fine, though. Give viewers a break. These are going to be long podcasts. I wonder if I should do a break system. I should probably do a break system. Well, that's fine. You're listening to Just a Chat podcast. This is the episode 1 of the series where I'm talking with Sean about, so far it's just a lot of Christian things with the Christian faith. I hear some sound. Are you back, Sean?
Yes.
Hi, welcome back.
Thank you. I remember what I was going to say.
Me too, but you go first.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that like it is important to mention how difficult. Can you hear that bird?
Not really. I heard
Okay.
something though. I don't know what it was.
That was a very loud seagull.
Oh, that was a seagull? That sounded like a child.
Yeah.
Anyways, go on.
Yeah. Um, it's important to mention how this is a very difficult situation to be in. Like like even like the situation your friend is in, which caused this whole thing,
Yeah.
because it really there's a lot of emotional investment there.
Oh yeah.
And just thinking about like I asked Chris this. Chris is our pastor at Yam.
Pastor Chris. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. For just for our visitors to have listeners to have context.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
I'm
Thank you.
sorry.
Thank you for that.
But yeah, that they would about like what to do in this situation. Actually, I'm gonna pull up the messenger conversation now.
Oh.
But
Okay.
uh, just so I can see what I asked, how exactly I phrased it. But what to do if like you're a Christian and then you're dating someone who was a Christian but isn't quite a Christian anymore, but there's a lot of like
Oh.
emotional investment there,
Yeah.
and then because that's a situation that can happen because both people start out as being pretty strong Christian, and then one person like their relationship decays, the other person, and then they're like, well, they're technically a Christian still, but like they're not really going to church, and then it's like they need to work on their relationship with God. Of
Yeah.
course, both people always need to, but they need to like really get out of lukewarmness and make up their mind.
Yeah.
So, okay, here's what I asked him. What should people do if you're already in a relationship and one person loses interest in God but doesn't fully renounce him? They're just not really interested. Should we continue to be with them? We do as like there is a history and their passion could be reignited, but also they might never regain interest in God.
Mm. That's interesting because I wanted to know what losing interest in God looks like without renouncing the faith. Like what? Actually, I guess I can relate a little bit, but I don't think I would have described it like that. I would describe it as I don't know. Yeah, what does that look like?
I'm not sure. I'm guessing it's just sort of like
But you were the one
technically
that
a
posed this
Christian.
question.
Yeah, I asked him that.
Oh, wait. Okay.
Yeah,
So
I
what
asked
was
Chris
what was the
that.
response?
He said, obviously, it's best to date someone who's spiritually mature and serious about their faith.
Yeah.
Like, I sort of brought this up beforehand. Like, and I formulated the question, but then he says that everyone has different seasons of faith,
Yeah.
and that God is the only real judge of, like, how spiritually mature someone is.
Uh huh.
But he also mentions that but at the same time, it's wise to consider reevaluate your relationship from time to time.
Mm-hmm.
And
Absolutely.
to step out of this and back into like the situation that you described where like your friend is being asked to be the best man of a wedding between his Christian friend, well, his or her Christian friend, and a non-Christian, and they don't really approve of that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So applying this, where is it? Yes, yeah, I don't think it's a good idea to. I'm sorry, I just lost all my words.
That's
But
okay.
let me pick this back up. For like within a I don't even know what I said. With regards to getting married, like to
Yeah.
go from like the just dating and being in a comfortable. Interesting that I use that word. But anyway,
Yes.
in a dating for a while, you know what I mean,
Yes.
to becoming engaged. There's like things that need to be considered,
Yeah.
not just well, is now a good time to get married? How much pressure is your family putting on you to get married and to have kids?
Yeah.
Like how like is everybody else getting married at this point? Is it our wedding's gonna be our wedding's cheap right now because no one knows if it's gonna happen or
Oh
not.
my gosh.
It's like and just sort of like practical matters. Well, I'm tired of living with my parents and it's too expensive to have a place by myself. So let's get married and live together that way. Like those things are not good reasons.
I would agree with that.
Or just even like, oh well, we've been together long enough. Sure, let's do it. I guess.
Sure, let's
That's
do it, I
not-
guess. Wow. That sounds so flaky. It's just like, yeah, whatever. Like, what was the point of this to you? Yeah. Anyways,
Yeah, it's like,
I
oh,
see what you're
and then
saying.
like both of them can be like, oh yeah, well, it's not like you're going anywhere or I'm going anywhere. We're comfortable. We like each other. So sure, I guess. Like there's probably people in that situation.
Mm,
But
yeah.
yeah, yes.
Yeah.
It really depends on. There's a lot of there's like important things to consider about getting married. For like, well, this is a well, this doesn't the situation the story well the situation right now doesn't quite fit into this because it sounds like the non-Christian was always a non-Christian.
Yeah. Sure.
Because yeah, if that's the case, then it's like, why are you even asking this? You know you're not supposed to do this. This is with like the Christian who's the Christian and the lukewarm Christian. There, it's like there's more decision making that needs to go into about like, okay, this is not a good state to get married in, and it's like you just like the other party needs to make up their mind about like, are they going to pursue God or not?
An
Because like they can
ultimatum,
like
if you're is that what you're saying? Like an
not
ultimatum?
necessarily an ultimatum, but just sort of like the we're kind of stuck here until you like to make a decision.
Ooh, I don't know if I like the sound of that. Because that's like you're literally forcing something out of someone else, but
That
you
is
really
true. Yeah,
shouldn't be, right?
yeah.
Even if it
I need
is
to.
like such a crucial decision, like, are you going to come to the faith? Are you going to, um, that kind of thing? Which, under normal circumstances, like encouraging someone to do that is good, but like in this circumstance, it sounds like you're forcing your partner to make a decision, and it's as if like, oh, if you don't say yes, we can't be together, and I don't. That's just
Yeah,
so negative, and I don't know if that's the right thing to do.
I
I
don't
don't
think it
think it
is the right thing
is.
to do, and
Yeah.
I definitely made a mistake with my words there.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
part
Good.
of it
Good.
is true that in the sense that like when you're not when if like you're going to pursue God and have a Christian marriage, not just little like a marriage ceremony, which a lot of people do, but like
No.
an actual like this is what we're going to do together. We're going to follow God as two people pursuing God. Then they would both parties need to be like, yes, I'm really sure about committing to this, and also just sort of like giving them an ultimatum type thing of like that, like the mistake of words I used doesn't really work because it
No.
causes a pressurized answer,
Yeah.
and
Exactly.
like if they say yes, like okay, I'm gonna do it. It's like, what is the intention behind that? Like, what is the heart? What state is the heart in?
Yeah. Yeah. I have a
But
response to your
mhm,
kind of thing that you just said, but I also remembered what I wanted to say before. So help remind me in case I forget again. The thing I want to talk about later on is keywords are love and sanctification or sanctifying. Just help me
love and
remember that if I
sanctification
forget.
talk about later. Okay.
Yeah. So like to me, a lot of this comes down to just what the point of marriage is. And to talk about that, we have to go back to what we talked about earlier, like a relationship with God. What does it mean to be Christian in the first place? What does it mean to actually not just Christian? What does it mean to believe in Christ? What does it mean to be a follower of God? And I think that when you want to boil that answer down, which you really shouldn't, but for simplicity's sake, the answer boils down to just getting closer to God, getting closer to our end goal of heaven. Um, and because we're human, we're imperfect. We always have
Hmm.
to, self-check. We always have to just look at ourselves and be like, where do I want to be? What is my next step? What do I not know? What do I need to know? What do I need to practice? What do I need to
Hmm.
do? All of these practical steps in terms of the faith, in terms of heaven as your goal. And I think the problem nowadays with a lot of people is that goal doesn't necessarily exist anymore. They live for worldly practicality, like practicality now. For example, oh, I should move in with my girlfriend beforehand, before we get married, just to see if we're compatible living together, just to see lifestyle habits and all of that. And I don't agree with that because there's a lot of issues of just purity and temptation there. And I do think that a beautiful part about marriage is that you're making a commitment so that you can spend the rest of your life figuring these things out. Right? These are problems that are meant to be tackled as like a pair. So what I think I'm trying to say here is like for those of us who
Hmm.
may be trying to date or may be dating as young men and women who may be Christian right now, what are you looking for in terms of who you want to date? Are you looking for someone funny? Are you looking for someone smart? Are you looking for someone good looking? For someone like what is your criteria? And to me, I think perhaps the most important and probably the only criteria that is necessary is their personal relationship with God, which
Hmm.
is why it's important to have a place like church where you can go and just meet other Christians, not just to grow your own faith, but also for things like this, to interact with people, to learn from them, to see how their faith is. And if someone's actions, someone's service, someone's lifestyle of faith is attractive to you, then you could, then maybe that's like the person that you can try and get a relationship with. I don't know if that sounds good, but essentially for like the rest of your life, you're spending this your life with another person. And if your end goal is heaven, then the point of a marriage is that you live with somebody who not only helps you through life, but also helps you get closer to heaven, get closer to God,
Mm.
right? And if they're not a Christian, they can't do that. So
Yeah.
if they're not a Christian, like why are you marrying them? For what point? For what's the purpose of marrying them? Which is why, for me personally, now before I date someone, I personally would want to be their friend first and foremost. Not because of the relation of just like, oh, get close, get comfortable with each other, but just to be able to see what is your lifestyle of faith. Is it something that I want to share in for the rest of my life? And are you capable of supporting my faith for the rest of my life? That kind of thing. That's the kind of
Yeah.
thing I would look for in a girl or a woman, sorry, if if I were to start dating. Um, Now, I didn't forget love and sanctification. The point of, I think, being a Christian or being a follower of God is to, part of it, I would say, is to love people, right? And what love is to desire and act on this, bringing people closer to God. People, including both ourselves and our friends and family and strangers and everyone out there, everyone who we can have a relationship with,
Hmm.
any kind of relationship, not just romantic. And I think that's a key point that a lot of people don't really think about, because it's like, at the end of the day, what are we trying to do in life? What is our goal in life? If your goal isn't heaven, if your goal isn't God, how can you call yourself a Christian if you're not living for them, right?
Mm.
And if you are living for them, then why don't your actions reflect that kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
My goal, I'll give a personal example. If I get into a relationship, my goal would be to, my partner would be to bring them closer to God while figuring out if they're the right one for me in my spiritual growth in the rest of my life. That would be the point of dating for me. Um, if I get married, I would hope that all of those kind of things align. Um, Now I've forgotten what I was going to say. I've actually forgotten what I was going to say. I don't like this.
Oh.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah. But
Okay.
it's just something
You.
along the lines of for the sake of sanctifying someone or bringing them closer to God, so that they can believe in God, they can live a life for God, and that God can make them holy. To me, that's really the point of having a relationship with people at all.
Yeah.
And the point of a romantic relationship or point of marriage, I remember now, is is so that you can do that personally with one person for the rest of your life while they do the same for you. It's mutual, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. If you don't want them to get closer to God, then that would be the reason you wouldn't marry a person, right? It's just like, oh, I don't necessarily want to help you for the rest of my life, and I don't think you can help me either for the rest of my life. We're not compatible in that sense, in the sense of like, for the rest of our lives, can we support each other spiritually? Can we support each other in that way? And I think everything else just comes after. Everything else comes after, and everything else shouldn't really matter all that much, because, again, I've said this a million times already, but I want to live for I want to live for heaven. I want to live for God, and that just means obedience to what God says. But not only obedience, but I have to think about what is practically the best. Not practically the best for my life now, but practically the best towards the future, towards heaven, and towards God.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's what to me sanctification is. And of course, I could talk about the sanctification between like a man and a woman specifically, but we're not there yet. That's not something that's not a can of worms we opened. So until we open that, I don't think I want to.
It's like, yeah, I don't know what I'm talking about here. I think it might be like this. I don't really know.
Yeah. But yeah, it's just like, what is the point of everything that you do? If everything you do is for the sake of practicality, then okay, cool. I would not say that that is a very Christian way of living. That's a very God-centered way of living at all. But if you want to live like that, I'll respect it, because I won't force or try to force any changes in your life. That's not my position. My position is to be a friend, have a relationship with you, so that I can continue to encourage you towards God. If you refuse that, okay, refuse it. That's fine. I don't really have a choice there. But I'm still going to try. I'm still going to be there for you, and I'll still do what I need to do. I'll respect it, but I won't I don't agree with it, kind of thing,
Yeah.
So like my answer to that friend who asked the problem, who asked about like invited to be groomsman, bridesmaid for their best friend who is going to marry a non-Christian, my personal answer would be, you can invite me to your wedding, but I will not be your groomsman, because I don't agree with it. But if this is your decision, I'll respect it and support it in that way. But I don't agree with it. This is my stance. I'll respect your decision, but my stance is not on the I don't agree with it. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, that makes sense. Also, like, yeah, that's a good answer, because
is it?
It like, I think it is.
Okay.
Because like, well, there's three things that I thought about when you were talking.
Oh yeah.
First thing is that practicality isn't that bad, but for non-Christians, because like, well, they gotta make things, try to connect the dots as best as they can.
Yeah.
Whereas for Christians, it's like,
God will
do you not have God? God will provide. Like, seek first the kingdom of God, and then like all your other needs
exactly.
will be provided.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like,
I love that
okay.
verse.
Yeah. I was looking for it, but I couldn't quite find it. So I need
okay.
to learn it better. The second thing is that like moving in together, part of that is also like trusting God that like you'll have places to live, and that like, maybe you might stay a bit longer with your family than everybody would like. But
yeah.
Another thing is that like just empirically, like, this has nothing to do with the church at all, but just in the studies that of like people who move in to like see if it'll work out, that is the chance of like them breaking up increases significantly.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so it does. So like, if you want to break up, move in together, and the church didn't have anything to do with this. That's just what happened, and it makes sense, because like, you move in together, and then like they're in your face all the time, and then like you naturally will get in each other's way and on each other's nerves, just because like you are living together. Mm-hmm. And for most people, it's just sort of like, yeah, maybe you're not the one after all. Notice the like destiny belief there, that there's one person out there, and then they just need to find it that like they can't get along perfectly with, like people don't even get along perfectly with themselves. It's just sort of like you make a decision, then afterwards you're like, why did I make that decision? And then you don't even like your own decisions.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, that's probably why that happened. But anyways, don't live together if you want to stay together.
I don't know if I necessarily agree with that because, that's definitely not the case with everyone.
Yeah.
Because, people live together, they make it work out. And,
Oh yeah.
some people would say, the problems are part of it, you just have to embrace it. So, yeah, I don't know if I necessarily agree with that sentiment, but I just don't agree with living together before marriage because, yeah, I do think that's something that we should leave in God's hands.
Yeah.
The practicality, literal practicality aspects of it aren't necessarily something that we should deal with. Like the important thing about deciding whether or not you want to get married, I think, should be the faith aspect, should be the aspects of your spiritual life, your spiritual compatibility, and all that. And then the physical compatibility, if you've looked through just your your personal relationship with God, then the point of marriage is to work through those other aspects, such as dealing with living together, habits, and all of that other stuff. Because I've seen so many examples personally in my life where, in their hastiness or in their just wanting to get married for other types of reasons, that have resulted in long-term issues down the line. And it's just
Yeah.
like, yeah, it's really bad. It's super toxic. It's super poisonous on the family, the relatives, the children, and they suffer so much from it. And I hate it. I absolutely hate it. I look at it and I'm like, even in an example of like two very strong Christians who are very supposedly rooted down in their faith, but then because of the fact that they don't edify each other in the way that lovingly sanctify each other. They don't love each other in that way. They don't want to see. They don't actively pull each other up closer to God, support each other in that way. Like 10, 20 years of marriage has become 10, 20 years of just infighting, and it results in a whole bunch of problems, and just it's awful. It's actually awful. No one wants their marriage to end up in like a state where every day you're just fighting, every day you're just suffering, because
Mm-hmm.
of the person you chose to marry, because you didn't deal with these things in the beginning. And I'm not saying this will happen to everyone, but it's like, it's it's not something we think about because we want enjoyment out of a relationship. We want to feel validated. We want to feel secure. And yes, those are important, but those are things we shouldn't look to people to give us. Those are things we should look to God to give us.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Anyways, I think I cut you off. I'm sorry. You said you had three things. I don't know if you said all of them.
Oh, the third thing is just sort of like I think that the last thing was the I'll attend your wedding. I can because like you want to be a friend and show support.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you won't be a groomsman bridesmaid because you don't support. You just fundamentally don't support the idea of marrying a non-Christian, and you don't think that's a good. And well, you don't think that is the good idea. That is what they should do.
Yeah.
I think there's a good compromise there.
Yeah. And then I thought about it. It's just like, oh, if you don't support my decision, don't come to my wedding at all. I'm not going to invite you.
Yeah.
If that happens, then I mean, okay, sure, I guess.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that
I just
and
have to be
just
okay with that. Like, if I would tell people, like, if you can't make this kind of decision, then don't do it. Because if it's going to sear your own conscience, if it's going to guilt trip you for the rest of your life, like, don't do it. Like, talk
Yeah.
things through with your friends if this is actually a situation that comes up. First and foremost, before anything of the sort is done, is like talk things through, make sure you understand each other's perspective, and if you there's no room to like, no willingness to listen to, you know, don't marry a non-Christian kind of thing. If there's no room to just try and understand biblical concepts and stuff like that, I mean, there's not really much you can do, and I don't think you should do much. That's just poking and prodding. in places you're not supposed to.
Yeah.
So it's just like you have to be ready for any consequence if you're going to make a radical decision.
Yeah.
But I would rather make a radical decision that, loses a friend or breaks a relationship than to renounce what I believe in, than to reject a core concept of my faith,
Yeah.
of my life, essentially.
Yeah.
Because faith needs to be your life. If it's not your life, then it's really not your faith. You're really not a Christian. You really don't have a relationship with God. We talked about this earlier.
Yeah.
Just you have to live it. And if you don't make these decisions, if you don't live it, then it's just like you're betraying your faith, essentially. That's how I
Yeah.
would see it. That's how I would see it.
Yep. Yeah. Just thinking about that. I had something to say and I just forgot it.
Oh
Great.
no!
But yeah, it's like, okay, I understand why they want to why the groom in this case wants to marry, because well, they have a lot of emotional investment, and then there's a lot of practical reasons in favor of doing it, because well, you've had this relationship with this person for a while. Ending a relationship would be difficult, starting another one would be difficult, but even still, it's yeah, there's a lot of emotional investment there, and you don't really want to do the alternative, but at the same time, it sounds like they were a non-Christian when they started dating, and it's this is exactly why they say not to do it. Because
no, sorry, I cut you off. You should finish that.
This is part of the reason, is that don't start something, because it's just gonna get harder and harder to stop. It's gonna hard. It's if you start a relationship that you're not supposed to be in, it just gets harder to get out of.
Yeah.
Because there's so much investment, and you don't want to do that, but at the same time, it's you can't go through with it, because it's very clearly that you're telling God in a very obvious way that it's essentially a rejection.
Yeah.
Not necessarily. Well, I was gonna say rejection of him, but I'm not quite sure if that's how to put it. But it's disobeying him in a very profound way, by marrying someone that he has made it very clear you are not supposed to marry.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's very important for the friend to stand by their convictions, and just sort of not just tell their friend and do whatever their friend wants, because
that's really not
it reflects on their faith.
Yeah, if
because
you
it's
really love your
I don't
friend,
want to compromise on this.
Yeah, if you really love your friend, the idea of love, like I mentioned earlier, is you want to bring them closer to God, closer to His truth, closer to heaven.
Yeah.
Which is obedience. And if you as a friend sit and let this happen without making clear your intention or your side,
Mm-hmm.
you're really not loving them at all. You're doing the wrong thing. It's actually not good for them in the long run. I also had something I wanted to say in response to you. Now that I've said that, it slipped my mind. Oh no,
Okay.
no, it was about, just because in this particular case, actually, by the way, there's so many cases of this in my life, among my friends. Now that just we're talking about it, if they started dating, and they started dating really early on, in high school, when the Christian has very little, I guess you could call it knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just well, what about that? And to that I would say, now I understand why a lot of Christian families would say don't date until a specific age, because it's the amount of understanding that you have as a teenager in North America is it can be ridiculously small. Not saying it's always ridiculously small, but generally this is what happens because of the environment and the culture that we grow up in here. So it's just when you bring these things, when you harbor these emotions and these feelings, and you have this time commitment and this emotional commitment for such a long time, it becomes super hard to let go of, like you mentioned. The more time you sink into it, the less you're going to want to let go, right?
Yeah.
Even
That's
more so when you start from a young age, when we're like full of hormones, growing in that sense, going through puberty and all of that. It's like you're digging a hole for yourself in the future. And so, yeah, I used to hate this concept just because this was something my parents would tell me, don't date when you're in high school. And for the sake of rebellion, I would want to, while also at the same time, I really wanted that feeling of just like validation and having someone in my life who values and cares for me and is affectionate, that kind of thing.
yeah.
But now I realize that, thankfully, the one relationship that actually kicked off for me in high school didn't go through, because that would have been rough. That I would have carried so much baggage of just like attachment. Thinking about it now, it's just like, yeah, I was an idiot back then. I knew none of this. How could I had possibly made decisions like, is this person able to uplift me spiritually in the right way? Not based off of my understanding of the Christian faith back then, but based off of a more complete understanding I have now, a more mature view. Now that I know more things, now that I've experienced more things and stuff like that. Just like that's not just not possible as a kid, because in admitting it, as a high schooler, we really are just kids, as a teenager, right? In terms of like faith and in terms of where you are spiritually, we're all kids. We're not nearly mature enough. So I think that in the future, if I ever do have a family and if I ever do have kids, I will also tell them to not date in high school, just because of that. But I'll make it very clear what the reason is. And I think the problem with the way I was taught was I was never told why. I was never shown why. And because I was never shown the consequences, I thought there were none. And then ultimately I suffered consequences, and it affected a lot of other people, which ended up being super dramatic and no, that's the wrong word. It ended up being super impactful on other people, but in a very negative way, It's like I hurt a lot of people. And it was just over one relationship that was never meant to work, that never would have worked the way we tried to do it. And then, yeah, in my life personally, God has pulled some interesting strings to interfere and just stop me from continuing on in any more relationships. And I'm very glad for that. In hindsight now, looking at things, it's just like, man, I was on the path to being an idiot again, and God was just like, not this time. I want you to actually focus on growing your faith and your knowledge of me, your understanding of me and experiencing me, first and foremost before you start dating. And I think that's super important. Just like, yeah, your relationship with God needs to be complete, not just in knowledge and understanding, but also in experience, also in practice. And I think a lot of people don't realize that practice is super important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a good. You actually I actually didn't think about that. Connect the. Here's why you don't date in high school. But of course, I don't think it's necessarily like you can't date anyone, but just sort of like, because there are like two Christian teenagers who genuinely did like very unusually understood and unusually wise and understood what this meant, and then they got married and like they lived happily ever after as like,
Oh, that's great.
yeah, but it's just
That's not
the
something that
odds of
happens
that
every
are
day, though.
so low that it's like, okay, well, here's why you don't date. Here's the reason why. If you somehow manage to be in like the very low circumstance that like both of you are somehow mature enough to get this and do it successfully, then it's like, okay, I can see that. Then I can be like okay with it. But most times it's like that's not happening most times.
You know what? I'm going to make a bold statement, and I'm going to say that kind of situation probably will never happen anymore. I just like, I'm looking at the kids that are growing up in church nowadays. I'm looking at in our church. Perhaps that's too narrow of a view, but just looking at that and being like, if this is the culture that's been going around these days, oh my goodness, nobody date. Otherwise, the entire church is going to be a mess. Like, oh my gosh, people nowadays, the young people, us included, I would wager, because we are also Generation Z. Sorry, you Americans, but like there's so much culture of just I want to do things for my own sake, for my own enjoyment. It's very self-centered, not necessarily selfish, but it becomes selfish down the line when you, by extension, apply these concepts to the rest of your life. And then, yeah, no, it's so much, it's so centered around just I don't want to use the word enjoyment anymore. I need to be able to describe what I'm saying with more words. Um,
Pleasure.
yeah, pleasure doesn't really cover all of it though. It's
It
like,
does. Yeah, it doesn't quite fit.
yeah, you know what I'm trying to say though, right?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
It's like ah, geared
This
around
sort of like
fun, geared
pursuit of
around
happiness.
yeah, geared around just like what do I have at hand that can satisfy this certain desire right now, this certain feeling that I'm lacking. I can have it in my hand in like seconds,
Yeah.
and then relationships will subsequently become like that if not taught properly. You know, it's just like, oh, I want some physical gratification right now. Hit my girl up, hit my man up. Um, I want some encouragement right now. Hit him up, kind of thing. Hey, you want to enjoy something together? I feel lonely right now. Give me some company. You know, it's like demanding immediate.
Gratification.
Yeah, and I'm not saying it's always going to be like that, but this is the kind of culture that I feel like is becoming more and more prominent in the young people nowadays. Just because there is so much, just they have everything. Everyone has everything they want. Everyone doesn't think of what they need because it was already there in the first place. And the more they want, the more they get. They always get what they want. And even the teachings in church are becoming more and more lenient, I feel like. In general, it's just like prosperity gospel is spreading. There's a lack of understanding of consequences. There's a lack of understanding of, you know, just like you can't just do whatever you want. You're not really the one in control here. Everything is by the mercy of God. Everything is made possible by God. He's giving us this freedom, but at the same time, it's too liberating if you catch my drift.
Yeah. It's hard to use freedom well.
Yeah, everything is being subjectivized. I don't know if that's a word or not, but like people do as they please, and it's not great. People do as they please. They teach as they please. They learn as they please, and that's the scariest thing. I had a conversation with a friend recently, just like, man, we want to stay local here in this city, but like in this country where free thought, free action is bleeding into the law. It's like this is a scary place to raise children in. I don't know if I want my kids to grow up here, and so my friend and I are just like, do we actually want to have kids? Do we actually want to have kids anymore? Because just like the thought of our children growing up in such a free environment with no restraint and just so much liberal thinking, so much liberal action behind it as well. So much so that they're becoming huge movements. They're becoming global phenomenons and sensations. It's like this is going to be very detrimental to their growing up as a Christian, as a believer. This is not a good environment for them. In fact, if anything, this is just the recipe to destroy someone's faith and all that. So it's like... But then I was encouraged by a pastor saying, you know, don't worry about that kind of thing because we grew up in a messed up environment and we're doing okay for the most part. Of course, we still struggle with things, but that's a part of our journey, right? So we don't necessarily need to worry about, again, the practicality of it. God will make a way if it is his will. We just need to trust it in that because God is in control, yeah? So I was encouraged by that, and it's just cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Long story short, trusting God, He will make a way. What was that verse? In all your ways, acknowledge Him, and He will make your path straight. Yeah, something like that.
Trust in the Lord your
With all
God
your
with all your
heart,
heart. Lean not on your own understanding.
understanding,
In all your ways acknowledge
acknowledge
him, and he
Him.
will direct your paths.
Yeah. That.
Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, I believe.
Oh, I don't know where it's from. I need to read my Bible.
It's Proverbs 3.
Oh, okay. 3, huh? Okay.
Yep.
That makes sense.
Yes. I feel like I was gonna go somewhere, and then like I forgot what I don't really know if I had anything to say. But yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, particularly about like the whole having kids thing. It's like, yeah. I mean, I do think that like we do live in like there's a lot of blessings here,
Yeah.
and it becomes very obvious when we can look at other parts in the world. But there are some definite weaknesses of um our cultural view of things
Yeah.
when it comes to like more spiritual things.
Yeah. We're spoon fed too many things, I feel like. And it's just like we're too comfortable with a lot of things that, if we
Yeah.
suffered a little bit more, I feel like we would come to appreciate certain things a lot more. And I think
Yeah.
now, because of that, I wouldn't say I've suffered too much in my life, but like, a good amount of suffering is actually helpful with building character, growing in understanding. And just like, I'm super thankful to God for like, for giving me just pain and suffering. Sounds funny, but like, I'm serious, because if not for those experiences, negative ones, there are certain concepts I never would have grasped. There are certain experiences I never would have had, certain people I never would have met, and just an appreciation of God's power through it all, His presence, and just actually experiencing that. Not some sort of just like intellectual academic just proof, but like personal encounter with the work of God, with the hand of God, and that's amazing to me. How in my life that's changed me and shaped me. Yeah. Oh boy, Sean, if you knew me when I was in early high school, and then you looked at me now, you'd be like, what the heck happened in between? Because you are not the same person, like, at all. And I think my best friend can testify to that. Like, my closest group of friends who's been growing up with me in our church all this time since we were kids, they can testify to that. Just like, I was like the complete opposite person I am now way back when. And it was through a bunch of just negative experiences in high school that God broke me down, and then after breaking me down, rebuilt me from the ground up, and like completely transformed me as a person, flipped my life upside down, but for the better, But like, of course, He has to break a lot of stuff, including who I was at the time, who I wanted to be, my self-proclaimed identity, and a lot of just my pride, And that was when I realized that, it was super humbling, because it was just like, we want to build something up, but sometimes God wants to build something else up. And God is obviously the more powerful one. So He's going to break what we're trying to build up. Now, we can have two types of responses. We can either come to terms with that and accept that, or we can flail about, wail, and be like, God, why would you let this happen to me? Why are you letting these bad things happen? As if God doesn't have a plan. As if God was just like, oh, go and suffer. You haven't suffered enough. It's like, no. Come on. But yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah. I think the problem with a lot of young people nowadays as well, including a bunch of our generation, is when we suffer, when we are hurt, when we go through pain and bad experiences, we don't have this immediate reaction of just like, God is behind the scenes somewhere. We kind of just think of it as just, oh, I'm suffering. Oh, woe is me. because I am a good person and I shouldn't be going through this. But it's just like, what gives you the right to say that you can proclaim yourself to be like in a comfortable place and stay there? Like, who gave you that comfortable place? Who gave you everything? Who's the one who, like, in control, actually?
Yeah.
We don't really recognize the authority of God as often as we probably should anymore. And I feel like that it's unfortunate because I grew up in that kind of a mindset. I don't know if it was just me, as like I wasn't teachable back then, or if it even might just be like the church and just the way I was exposed to the religion, the faith. It's just like, it's not a thing anymore. Like, God is in my pocket. He's my 911 call. And yeah, otherwise he's just in my pocket at my beck and call. That's not who God is, but that's how we treat God so much of the time.
Mm.
You know?
Yeah.
Oh. Anyways.
Yeah. A lot of good points there.
Thanks. Oh, there's an older person who I do Bible studies with and learn from as kind of like a mentor figure. They shared with me in our small group a while ago, saying that because of how our country is so liberal and we have so many progressing movements and thoughts with regards to like identity and how they're all leaking into the laws and they're becoming mandatory to like follow now. Their child and the grandchild, or yeah, they were like, the child was like, you know what, I think I want to move to another country where the ideas aren't so liberal, where they control this kind of thinking. And they were like, okay, so you want my grandchild to be raised in a country with a different kind of thinking. What country are you thinking of? And they were like, Russia. And then they were like, wait, hold on a second. Russia? Okay, you're right about that. But at the same time, there's a lot of other issues that come with living in Russia. I don't think that's a good decision necessarily. And it was just a funny story to hear at the time.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it's true. It's true.
And that's exactly the issue, though, because it's like, well, I want to go somewhere else. Well, okay, where?
Problems everywhere, dude.
Yeah.
Yeah. But again, like the pastor reminded me, it's just like, God will make a way if we learn to trust in Him. And just, there are going to be hard times. There are going to be times of suffering, times of pain. We just have to bear through that because, yes, it's a part of life. And yes, it's meant for good,
Mm.
Yeah. I think people have this interesting understanding of what good is. Not only is it like subjective to them, but it's like, even in the church, we say, oh, good is, not sin.
Yeah.
But I think that, at the end of the day, that's still slightly incomplete of an understanding. I don't know if it's incorrect necessarily, because they're not wrong. Sin is bad. And things that are good do not involve sin, but like,
It's deeper than that.
it's deeper than that, yeah. But it's also not that hard to understand if you understand the character of God. It's just like, what God says is good is good. Yes.
Yeah.
And then what God wants us to do is good. Even if it doesn't seem good. Or even if it doesn't seem, yeah, it's just like, oh, but it's hard. Oh, but I don't want to do it. Oh, but it involves bad stuff. It's just like, yeah, but God said it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a whole conversation with someone else about just like, what is good? What makes something good when you do it? And what makes something like correct, right to do versus just
Hmm.
good, Because an example I heard before, I actually heard this from like a really heated debate about missions work. It's like we can go out there and we can feed the homeless, we can go international, we can help the unfortunate, we can save people from their situations. But does that glorify God? At the end of
Yeah.
the day, does that glorify God? And
Yeah.
one person's answer was no, because you're doing humanitarian work, sure, but where is God in all of that? Like, you're doing things that would help them, but how does it help them? Does it help them get closer to God? Does it, shed light on the gospel? Maybe. But, like, at the end of the day, their argument was you're just changing their situation. That's probably something we should already be trying to do. And then they continue to go on, like, if you really want to glorify God, it's just like, you gotta actually, like, have God involved in terms of just, like, spreading the gospel, sharing the good news, evangelizing, being in a relationship with them, and following through with stuff like that. It's just like, okay, that's interesting. I've never really thought about it like that. But what do you think about good acts that don't necessarily involve God or the Bible or the gospel or anything like that? Do you think that those acts still glorify God and further his kingdom? Or do you think that they're just acts that help people, by definition, changing their circumstances for the better?
Hmm.
A loaded question, I
I
know.
think, yeah, they are good acts, but at the same time, and yeah, they're like one of the fruits, but they're not. I don't think that on their own they're enough
Hmm.
to consider to like replace, like for example, evangelism and telling people about that. It's just, oh, you're helping people. That's good. You should
Yeah.
help people, but that's not like a substitute for the gospel.
Yeah.
Like improving people's, serving people through improving their situation is not necessarily a substitute for telling them,
Sharing God with them.
evangelizing them with them. Yeah.
Yeah. Which really makes. I agree with that, by the way. And after
Yep.
I thought about that and came to the same conclusion that you did, I thought about it a bit more in terms of, like, a direct application of our lives. When we tell each other to go and live lives that reflect our faith, are we actually, when we do quote unquote nice things? I don't want to use the word good, because are they good? Like, where's
What is
God?
good?
Yeah. Like, at the end of the day, are we bringing God into the picture? Because at the end of the day, these actions, they are subjectively, by our definition, good. But without God, are they really? Like, we're not bringing God into this. We're not sharing God with people. And then unless we do, I would wager to say that these are just subjectively good actions and not actually good actions.
Yeah.
It's like day by day we go to school and just like, oh, I'm a good student. That glorifies God. How exactly? We say it does, but does it actually? And as a student, you're probably supposed to be a good student in general, like, without being told, without being expected to, because in trying to glorify God, we need to we demonstrate by action, we demonstrate by example, right? And then with that comes opportunities to bring God up. But until we do, those actions are very much just that, plain old actions. They don't really serve much of a purpose except for furthering our own chances towards where God may want us to be, in, in
Yeah.
in the career, in the workforce, the career path kind of thing. And then further by example, this isn't more of a personal example. I worked, you know this. I worked at a bubble tea shop for quite a long time, for a few years, and
Hmm.
there's this one regret I've always had. The first manager, the manager I worked with for the majority of my time there, sometimes I would be shifted with other employees who I knew went to a Christian school. And they were classmates with my cousin. They were actually really good friends with my cousin. And I had so many opportunities. I kept thinking about it, of just asking about their faith, talking about our beliefs, because not everyone who goes to Christian school actually is a Christian.
Yep.
Right? And I never found the courage to do that. I was so afraid of, I don't even remember what I was afraid of. I was just socially anxious. And I look back on those moments and I'm just like, man, those were all unique individual chances that will never happen again. Whether or not I meet them again is one thing, but those chances specifically are gone.
Yeah.
Each one was special, each one was unique, each one was an open door God left for me, and I had actively shut it because I was afraid. And that's such a stupid reason, right? I regret that so much. And then afterwards, they transferred management over, so I had new managers, and the new managers were Christian, and we actually had conversations about the faith, and I liked those, despite the fact that there was kind of a language barrier because my Mandarin sucks, and I couldn't really convey deeper ideas properly. But they shared with me resources, they shared with me learnings and stuff like that, and I thought, you know what, this was good. You know, I don't know their background, their actual beliefs, their core doctrine and all that, but the fact that we had these conversations was good. The fact that they taught me stuff, that glorifies God, right? I thought about that and I was just like, man, this is what I would call good. You know?
Mm.
My conversations with my previous colleagues, you know, I wouldn't say they were not nice because we enjoyed our time together, but that's not like fellowship time, you know. That's not like we talked about God, we furthered our knowledge, we shared opinions and exchanged thinking, you know. I would hesitate to call that good or in any way glorifying to God. And I think that that's something I grew up with that I never really realized that, you know, I can think I'm doing good. I can think I'm doing great things for God. What if I'm really doing nothing at all?
Yeah.
I'm just comfortable, you know? And I looked at those moments where I was thinking of just bringing up the topic of faith. So many windows. And I was afraid. And I realized, yeah, that's exactly what I should be feeling. Because comfortable is exactly what I don't want, right? That feeling of tension, that feeling of fear of rejection, social anxiety, that's the kind of feeling that prompts me in the right direction. And it's strange to think that because we shy away from those so quickly, right? It's just like, oh, that's not something I should do because it's risky. But there are just times where we might just be called to do the risky. We might just be called to embrace the uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Long story short, I don't think my time at Bubble Tea was wasted. I simply wasted a bunch of opportunities.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
sometimes people just have opportunities but aren't able to. What's the difference between like not being able, not just sort of like being able but not doing it, versus not being able to, even though it looks like you might be able to do it when you actually can't due to anxiety or other things?
Is that a rhetorical question or are you asking for real?
I'm not sure.
Okay. So in short, when is it a case of unwillingness and when is it a case of ability is what you're asking?
Mm-hmm.
Or lack of ability. I would
Yeah.
ask the question then, what would you consider to be the case for someone who is unable to do something? Like, under what circumstances would that happen? Would that be a thing?
I don't know.
Yeah, because that's what I'm thinking. is there ever a moment where we're unable to do something, where we're not able to by ability? Because we can all have conversations, albeit just how well we can have a conversation. And I think at the end, how well we can have a conversation doesn't really matter, because maybe the important thing is just to have one, or to try and have one, because
Yeah.
practice and all that, right? We improve our ability by doing things. And that sentiment, I feel very strongly for, because God does not call the ready, God calls the willing.
Hmm.
And the willing are usually not ready.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Like look at Moses and Abraham when they first started out. They were a mess. And they made so many mistakes, right?
Yeah.
Heck, even when David was called to fight Goliath, he was a child. No one would say he was ready. No formal soldier
Yeah.
training, no experience on the war front, but God used those people. And to this day, he still uses people who are willing and not ready. And that was how Samuel was taught by Elijah, right? When God called him in the night, Elijah told him, next time God calls you, respond. Speak, your servant is listening. Because we need to be in a position of willingness and not readiness. It's okay that we're not ready. God will equip us, kind of thing. So that's why I wonder whether that question is valid or not. Because God doesn't look for ability, God looks for willingness.
Hmm.
Yeah. We don't
I
need
suppose
to
part
be
of
ready.
Yeah.
He
I
will
suppose
make
part of
us
it is
ready.
also. Oh.
No. A part of it also, sorry, I keep cutting you off.
Yeah. A part of it is also trusting God with, in this case, the anxiety or like the awkwardness.
Yeah, I would say so. And I would
Yeah.
even say, the more we do something, carrying that anxiety, the better it gets. We will improve, right? Or at least God will help us to improve.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I actually have an example of this. When I first started serving in the church, one of the first things I did was vacation Bible school, running children's summer camp, right? For a week every year. And I remember I was never formally trained to teach. I was never really formally trained to run a classroom. And yet now I am one of the head teachers every single year who does this. Um, and I run my own class every year. I admit it's definitely not perfect, but it's good because the relationship I develop with these kids is phenomenal. I was never ready at any point in time until just one day everything's fit together. Everything snapped into place. I had the experience, I had the knowledge, I had the mistakes under my belt. And it was just now it's just like, God, I'm ready, use me. What do you want me to teach today? What kind of children are in my class? What can I do? What can I use kind of thing.
Mm.
And I think that was the case with even biblical characters as well. As you look at like Abraham and Moses, they never stopped making mistakes, but they also got better at what they did because they continued to obey. Keyword being obey again. You know?
Yeah.
Uh,
Hmm.
so that's what I think. Ability
Yeah.
doesn't
That
matter.
makes sense.
Yeah. But would you say you agree with that?
Yeah, I do.
Hmm.
I didn't consider that.
Yeah.
Or, well, I forgot about it. I've heard that before, but I just needed
Yeah.
a reminder.
Yeah. We all need reminders, and this is
Yeah.
why we have these talks.
Yep.
I think I just remembering a conversation I had with somebody about, choosing to serve in the church. And I think that certain things, there does need to be a level of just understanding of it's not simply a matter of willingness anymore. For example, the system we have for VBS is if you're a new person or if you're fairly inexperienced, like you've only had 1 or 2 years of experience, you'll probably be assigned an assistant type of role, like a teaching assistant or a games assistant, and you'll operate under someone who's experienced, right? So someone who's
Yeah.
taught for years and years and years. And I think that that's a great model for leadership because proper leadership, if done well, is you receive it first and foremost, and then you understand it after you've received it and experienced it personally, and then you practice it, and then you do it. It's not a kind of thing where it's just like, oh, we'll have a few training sessions for you, and then boom, you're ready to be leaders, you're ready to be counselors, kind of thing. You have to be led, you have to be counseled properly. Then you have to understand what they did for you. And then you have to practice it yourself as an assistant, kind of like shadowing at a workplace, or just, as a new in trainee kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then when you've practiced and made mistakes and gotten the experience, then you can lead for real, kind of thing. But that entire process requires willingness. You have to be willing to make mistakes. You have to be willing to be at fault. You have to be willing to not be okay sometimes. And I think that's beautiful too, because it's beautiful how God can use bad things and turn it into good things. Namely, growth and transformation and results,
Yeah.
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 Yeah. But that's what I think, and I don't know if I'm correct. But I certainly know that with leadership, it's something we need to experience first. It's something we need to practice first before we get into it. It's not something anyone should just say and do at the drop of a pin, kind of thing. Yeah, otherwise, there's no standard, there's no qualification, and some people will be like, oh, that's not fair. I feel left out. It's not meant to be inclusive, though. It's meant to be structured,
Yeah.
This isn't one of your social gatherings where your friends are part of the leadership team. That means you want in as well. No, it's a very important act and system that's in place to build lives. That's there to change lives. You can't do it just because you can or want to. You have to understand that, right? You have to practice it correctly under tutelage, and then with mastery, then you can do it properly, kind of thing.
Yeah. This reminds me of our conversation last week.
Did we talk about something similar?
We talked about youth leadership.
Oh yeah, that's right. That can of worms.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Don't know if we want to get into that today.
Probably not.
Yeah, that's a whole other spiel.
What else is on your mind?
There definitely were other things, but now my brain is in focus mode, thinking about the topics that we kind of just talked about. Yeah. I do remember though that this is just something I want to bring up to you personally. On Sunday, when I had a Bible study, we went through in Romans, some apparent contradictions. Have you heard of that term before?
Yes, I think. I think so.
Do you know what they are?
I don't. I heard of the term.
Okay. Well, they're actually pretty self-explanatory. Apparent contradictions are contradictions that look like they're contradictions in the Bible, but when you study them properly and deeply, they actually make sense, perfect sense. And it's the fact that these types of things exist that throw people off about whether or not the Bible is valid or not. because it's like, oh, the Bible contradicts itself. How could this possibly be reliable writing or reliable
Yeah.
anything at all, you know? But like, it's the fact that these so-called contradictions that are apparent don't actually contradict themselves was just super interesting to look into. So my Bible study group on Sunday, we've been going through some of these contradictions. Actually, it's just one big contradiction that we've been going through every single week because it's so big of a contradiction. I finally understood it this past Sunday, which is really sad to say because we've been going through the same contradiction for like 3 weeks. But yeah, no, that was just super interesting to realize is a thing because it just means that I don't study my Bible enough. And yeah, but it was just super cool to look at, to study and realize, you know, this is what the Bible says. This is what it seems like it says, but really what does it say with proper understanding, with deeper study? We flipped literally through the entire Bible, Old Testament and New Testament, books and books and chapters, to prove that the contradiction does not exist. And we did it. We looked through it. I learned, well, I wouldn't say I learned, I kind of just took note of everything. But now I can have that reference. I can always look at my notes and be like, yeah, this is where I should look to prove that.
What was the contradiction?
So in the beginning of Romans, particularly in chapters 2 and 3, you know what? I need to pull up my Bible because I don't want to botch what I'm about to say. I don't want to say the wrong thing. On a side note, as I'm going to flip through my Bible, I realized that I actually flipped through a paper copy of the Bible faster than going through any digital versions of Bibles. And I'm very happy with that.
Yeah, I'm the same.
Yeah? Bro, best gift for me in any circumstance is give me a Bible. Especially a Bible with space to, like, write stuff in it. Because, yes. Anyways.
Which version?
NIV, ESV, and NASB. Those kind of things. Yeah, the common ones. Anyways, Romans chapter 2 says, it is not those who hear the law who are righteous, but it is those who obey the law who will be declared righteous. With righteous being, you know, God makes them holy. So, believers, essentially. And then in chapter 3, there's 2 verses. One that says, no one will be declared righteous in his sight by observing the law. Another verse says, we maintain that a man is justified or made righteous by faith apart from the law. And it's just like, wait, what? It says, man will be righteous if they obey the law in one chapter. And then in another chapter it says, no one will be made righteous by observing the law. Sounds like a contradiction, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But then we went through and we looked at what this law was actually referring to, what the context of this is, what Paul was writing, and what he meant when he was saying these things, and not just what it seems like it's saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Long story short, this is a reference to the Old Covenant, which you already mentioned, so I believe you already know it. How, you know, Paul doesn't like the idea that the Jews at the time relied on the Old Covenant and solely on the Old Covenant as their idea of salvation. Because Jesus had already come and gone at that time, right? The idea was that Jesus is the one who came and fulfilled the Old Covenant and set in place a new covenant that was possible for us to follow. The problem with the Old Covenant was, because of humanity's state of sin, it was not possible to follow the Old Covenant. What he was saying in chapter 2 was, if we could follow the Old Covenant, that would be great. But the reality is we can't. It's not possible. We don't have that ability. But by God's grace, we can. And God's grace came in the form of Jesus Christ, the new covenant. That was the idea.
Yeah.
You know.
And Jesus talks about fulfilling the old covenant.
Yeah, yeah. Because the question comes up of just like, oh, if no one can obey the old covenant, like, what was the point of it? You know? And like a big part of the old covenant is, it was to set up the new covenant,
Yeah.
right? It was set up so that Jesus could fulfill it and then make the new covenant for us. Yeah. And then there was also the question of, before Jesus' time, what about all the believers? What about all the Jewish people? Like, how were they saved prior to Jesus bringing grace into the world? And then we talked about how, even though Jesus wasn't here at that time, he was like, to them, he was a future event, because God is timeless, and because God is a God of forbearance, of patience, and withholding judgment. Even though Jesus was a future event for them, his grace covers them as well. And then we looked at some proof of how Old Testament characters knew about Jesus Christ even before he existed, and that was mind-blowing. And that proved, even the concept of Christ coming to die for our sins was an Old Testament concept, and that I didn't know. And I was like, oh, that was good,
Yeah.
Yeah, a good mind blown, if you will.
Mm.
Yeah. So I loved the study on Sunday. My eyes were literally opened, and I was just like, oh, that was such a good feeling.
That's good.
Understanding and knowing these things, I'm just like, oh, yes, I get it. Yeah. I've learned a lot from that Bible study. Just talking about a lot of things that aren't usually talked about in the church, but are so important, and just like, why don't we actually talk about them? Things like federal headship, things like apparent contradictions, things like the proto-evangelium, the idea of the fourfold state of man kind of thing. I mean, I think that one we might talk about a little bit, but I don't hear it very often.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah. All is good.
Yes.
What about you? Anything else on your mind right now?
No, there is nothing on my mind.
Just a clean slate, eh?
Yes. I'm content.
Yeah, it feels good when we have like a good conversation and we get through a lot of things, right? Yeah.
Yes.
I thrive off of these kinds of talks, but I also can't stand like really, 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 really old talks sometimes.
Yeah.
It does get tiring.
Yeah, it's good,
Yeah.
but too much is too much.
Too much is too much. Yeah, we all need rest. But rest for the sake of getting back into it,
Yeah.
Yeah. That was an interesting concept to learn when I was in high school. That was a concept I learned in high school. Just we don't work to rest, we rest to work.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. And then in an application to everything else, it's like you need to take breaks from everything, but for the sake of going back in.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in a sense, we never actually retire from anything, because a break from the Word of God means we'll get back into the Word of God. A break from Bible study means we'll be getting back into Bible study. Until it's actually over, nothing is actually over. I mean, okay, that sounded really stupid, but yeah, we're meant to work.
Hmm. Yeah, but not like work in the sense of like working like right now, like going to job and all that stuff, because that drains us. But like work in the sense of that something fulfilling, something that like because it feels good to like accomplish things,
Oh
not to
yeah,
be like drained of all your energy, but just sort of like to have accomplished things, to be good at something.
I would say that. Yeah, I would also say that I would think that like working a job. Well, I would say that is part of it, but that's kind of like there is a limit to that, like a physical limit.
Yeah.
Because you take vacations and breaks so that you get some time off, and then you've got to get back into it someday, one day, until you can't. That's why retiring from work, like job wise, is a thing, because limits. But with God's work, there are no limits. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. Wonder what work is supposed to be like biblically. Like what exactly was their role of like Adam and Eve? Like how was work done in Eden?
I let me think about what I'm going to say before I say it. I think that if you look at Eden and Adam and Eve, you got to look at like what God commanded them to do, because I do think that that was work. But what was it specifically? Um, I'm gonna pull up my Bible again. So in the beginning, he said, into all these. Where is it exactly? Uh, Here it is. I found it. In in chapter 1, it says, "Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, and over every living creature that moves on the ground." I think that was their mission statement.
Hmm.
And the job was, you are the caretakers of the earth, right? If we thought of like gardeners or like zookeepers or just pet owners in general, that was their
Yeah.
job, to rule over the earth and to do as God commanded, which is to subdue it, to rule it, to care for it, essentially. Yeah.
I'm just thinking. So the closest thing to that is me having the my job right now is to brush the cat.
This is why I want pets. It's just like taking care of another thing, not just children, but like other animals, because they're very similar in the sense that you have to understand the thing, and then you have to accommodate to the needs, right? As the one who has more understanding, more ability, and it's supposed to be good. Just sucks that I'm allergic to animal fur. Anyways,
Mm.
yeah, that was half the mandate, right? The other half was to be fruitful, to increase, uh, on the increase to humanity on the earth. And I think that part of that is the upbringing of children. It's like raise your children right, in teaching them about God, the ways of God, and all that stuff. So parenting. That's how I would see it.
Mm.
And I think back then, because there was no sin in the world, there was no ability to disobey, and thus there was no need for breaks.
Hmm.
I don't know. That's just a thought that occurred to me just now.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
and when you think about like the fourfold state of man, and how before they ate from the tree of good and evil, the tree of knowledge, sorry, um, like there was the ability to obey and disobey, and once they chose to disobey, there was no longer the ability to obey anymore.
Hmm.
So perfect obedience was no longer possible, thus the need for breaks from like
Hmm.
work. I don't know, that's just how I think of it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I don't know about that one.
I'm not sure.
Yeah. If any of you guys listening into this know anything more, let us know somehow, one way or another. Yeah.
Something like, comment, subscribe. It's not my channel, it's yours, so I can say that.
I appreciate that. Thank you. But that's not the point I want to do this. So it's okay if you don't. Just want to share this with people. I feel like we've had very good conversation today. Like
Indeed.
this is definitely something I want to share with other people.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd love to get more people in on this. So far, I have 2 people who are willing to be a part of the podcast, 2 good friends. Yeah. If anyone listening happens to have some topics they want to talk about, I'm literally open to talk about anything and everything. Let me know, and we'll see. Sean and I are not in the same room. If you guys couldn't tell by the recording, yeah, we're recording. I'm recording his voice via a messenger call. So, yeah, anyone is potentially able to come join the show.
Yeah. It would be interesting to have multiple people at once.
That would be interesting. It would also be a little chaotic, I feel like.
Yeah.
It's just like, because we're not recording our faces, like who's talking, if we have similar voices, and then if all 3 people start talking at once, it's just like, oh, well,
Yeah.
there goes that. But yeah, today has been good so far.
Hmm. Yeah, I liked our call today.
Yeah. Was there anything else that you wanted to talk about?
Nope. I do not have anything to say.
Yeah, I think my mind is starting to run on empty as well. Uh But what are you gonna do for the rest of the day today?
Probably continue reading those books that I got.
Oh yeah, right. You said you were reading some books. Yeah, continue to let me know how they go.
Yes.
Yeah. I
I'm
have
trying to make sure that like I finish all the books before I buy any new ones,
yes.
and slowly get out of like the work through the backlog of books I have accumulated over the years.
Oh, dude, I have so many books that I haven't read. Yeah, at church, they set out this box with just like free books. Anyone can take anything, kind of thing. You know. I
Yeah,
grabbed a bunch on several occasions, and now my bookshelf is full. and I, some of them are like textbook books, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I need to start reading them. But yeah.
yeah, I know that feeling.
Oh yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah. Would you say this is a good place to end our call today?
yep, I think so.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you very much, Sean, for your time. This has
Yes.
truly been a very very nice call. We've had some good conversation today.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you, Wesley.
Yeah. So next week again, same
Yep.
time, we'll do this. And
I'll see you before then.
will you?
Aren't we
Oh,
doing the
oh
thing
yeah,
on
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Saturday?
We're doing the thing. We're doing the thing. That's right. That's right. Yeah, I'm gonna have to write that down. Otherwise, I'm gonna forget. So yeah, thank you for listening to episode 1 of Just a Chat podcast. Please tune in next time. The upload schedule will probably be very erratic. I will probably not have a schedule at all and just try to upload things when I can. But again, thank you, Sean. I look forward to seeing you again on another
Mm.
episode of the podcast. Literally just us talking. And yeah,
Mm.
thanks, guys. We'll see you around.